Hey everyone, it's Alyssa and Nicole here with Blondes Breakdown Real Estate. Today we're going to continue our series on the buyer contingencies, and today we're dealing with the HOA contingency. So we brought on Jason Ross. He has been our risk manager over the years for Reef Point Realty. He's an amazing resource. He's sat on mediation and arbitration boards, and he's going to talk about everything HOA and answer all of our questions. So welcome, Jason.
Thank you very much for having me. Great to be here with you guys.
Awesome. Alrighty, Jason, if you would please just give us a little intro on you and tell us about your background in real estate.
Sure. I'm a licensed broker in California. I've been a realtor for 16 years, and of that, about the last 5 years, I've been a broker. I've been in risk management for about 7 years of that time. And I actually own and operate a brokerage up in Los Angeles as well.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you for that intro. So now that our viewers know who you are and what you do, we've got a few questions to kind of start off our conversation on HOAs.
Sure. Fire away.
Perfect. All right, so let's start from the beginning. Can you just explain what is an HOA and what's its purpose?
Sure. So at best, at Homeowners Association, its best thing that it does is, and this is, you usually see this in condo complexes or townhome complexes, it gives people a certain quality of life, maintains a level of stability in terms of the quality of the homes being upkept a certain way, and just the overall appearance of the neighborhood, maintaining a certain level of happiness and harmony, so to speak, that you cannot find in a neighborhood where it's just every house on the street. So when you think of, if you want a neighborhood that's going to stay nice, if you're in a nice HOA, it's probably going to stay that way for a very long time.
Awesome. So what would you say, Jason, are some pros of HOAs that you've seen before?
Probably the biggest one is going to be, in addition to just having that level of quality of life, is going to be the freedom from big repairs. So if you own a townhome or a condo, you don't usually ever have to worry about replacing the roof. You don't ever have to worry about the cost of replastering the swimming pool. All of those things that can become huge ticket items, they become a communal expense, or for all of the owners to share together. And that can be of great financial relief or incentive to a lot of people.
Totally.
So for a first-time home buyer, it's like you're paying all the maintenance monthly versus it coming up as a big repair cost.
Right. So if you've ever seen what it costs to replace, let's say, like a roof, it can easily get into $15,000, even more if it's depending on the size of the house, or if it's a two-story house. In a homeowners association, typically, now not all of them, some of them do have different responsibilities, but generally speaking, in any attached housing, usually all of these large expenses become that of the HOA, and that becomes a big benefit for people not wanting to be worried about any of those kind of costs.
Gotcha.
What's some of the biggest cons you've seen about getting into an HOA? What should people be kind of aware of on the con side?
Yeah, the biggest one that I say to people is that what you see is what will be. And I really mean that. What you see is what will be. So if you're inside a complex where you can see there's a lot of trash, or there are, let's say, shopping carts or bicycles all over the place, or maybe there's graffiti in the hallways or in the common areas and nobody's taking care of it, and things are generally sort of run down and a mess, it's going to stay that way almost in perpetuity. There usually is no Superman around the corner waiting to come out and fix everything. I mean, an HOA, a homeowners association, is literally that. It's an association of those owners, and it's going to be a very vivid reflection of them as well. And so the big downside that I always tell people is what you see is what will be.
Gotcha. I like that. I'm going to use that. So what would you say are the main components of these HOA docs that we will receive once we open escrow?
So when you go into escrow, you're going to receive a lot of information from the HOA. And that sometimes can be in the neighborhood of, 200 or more pages. They're going to include things like the HOAs. The baseline of it is going to start with their cc&rs. And that stands for covenants, conditions, and restrictions, what we all call in the business the cc&rs. That you can almost think of cc&rs as almost the constitution of the homeowners association. It is the backbone.
Quick question, Jason, because we
Sure.
just had Ryan Lipsey for title on, and there's cc&rs attached to title. Are those the same, or are there different cc&rs?
Yeah, cc&rs are attached to title reports because they are a matter of public record. And so that's why they do come up on the title reports, and they actually will, and they really will function as the backbone guiding rule about how the HOA works.
Okay, but they are the same documents, so
They are
people
the
don't
same
need to be
ones.
concerned about reviewing two sets of CC&Rs.
No, it's the same set. Sometimes you can get a
Perfect.
copy of it from a preliminary title report, but it will be the same as the one that comes with the HOA documents overall.
Gotcha.
And so those will oftentimes, the CC&Rs will be sort of the starting point. And from there, you can go out to things like the bylaws, which are also sort of how the HOA will be governed. That gets into more of the procedural things. Most people don't get too caught up into that, but it is, it can be interesting reading for some, I suppose. The Articles of Incorporation, almost every HOA in California is a nonprofit corporation. And so Articles of Incorporation usually happen once in the HOA's history, and that's the end of that. The biggest one for people, the most important ones in my view, are the operating rules. And there's oftentimes, depending on the size of the HOA, if an HOA is small, usually you'll have a more informal process. Let's say it's a 5 or 6 unit condo complex. The rules will get much more informal, and it may not be as written out as formally as some. But if you get into a larger HOA, 100, 200 units or something, really big, oftentimes they will have a very formalized list of rules and regulations. And those will be the things that people really want to pay attention to. Another thing that you'll get inside those documents that is of great importance is going to be the HOA's budget, their financials, how they're managing their money, and something that oftentimes people overlook, which is their reserve study. And the larger the HOA, the more likely that they have had a reserve study done. And a reserve study is a great metric about whether or not the HOA is managed well financially, or whether they could be looking at a potential dues increase.
So what does that look like when you're looking at the documents? Does it outline how much funds they have, how much they've used? Can you give us a little bit more insight on the reserve fund?
Sure. So a reserve fund is an amount of money that usually the property management company or the HOA's accountant will suggest to them that they should have this much set aside for big repairs. And it's an arbitrary amount set aside for the eventual time that things like the roof needs to be replaced on the buildings, or the building needs to be painted, or the pool needs to be replastered, or things of that nature, grand big repairs. And they will actually itemize it out to small repairs as well. But in the reserve study, when the reserves, like all of us, we want to have a rainy day fund with our personal accounts, so that when things happen, we're prepared for it. And that's the idea of the reserve study. And what happens is, when a homeowners association does not set aside enough, the reserve study will usually point out that it's underfunded, and will indicate how the percentage, and they'll show a percentage of usually 0 to 100 in terms of the funding that the reserves are funded. And the closer it is to 0, that equals bad. And of course, getting closer to 100 equals good. And there's oftentimes in some of the HOA documents, there's a chart that will show, it'll be like a graph, and it will show an arrow over the percentage on that scale, and to that, whether that equals that it's well funded or poorly funded or somewhere in between. And that actual one, I show that to people all the time, that this indicator is it's a great way to sort of predict. You might have a dues increase, and the monthly dues may go up because some big project may be coming, next year, and they're not prepared for it. And as a result, they may need to raise everybody's dues.
So that kind of leads into the special assessment talk. Can you go into special assessments and how that would affect somebody that has the HOA?
Sure. So a special assessment is oftentimes a separate additional cost on top of your monthly dues. And that usually becomes part of the monthly dues essentially. But let's just say that a homeowners association has a monthly dues, your regular dues of $300. Mm-hmm. And this actually happened to a client of mine who was in escrow purchasing a townhome about 4 years ago. All of the units,
We had one too, Jason.
Oh, did you? Okay, yeah. There were about 6 buildings, and there were actually 60 homes in this complex, and there were 6 buildings, and they had to do the roof on. It was time to replace the rooftops on all of them, and there was not enough money to do it. So they put out a vote for whether we want to do the roof now and take an extra $35 a month from everybody for 4 or 5 years, or do we want to hold off the roof and do some type of other dues assessment. In that HOA, the owners all voted to have it was an added dues of about $35 or so. And that ran for about 4 years, and that's how they funded the actual replacement of the roof. And so it comes up for a vote, and like everything, when you have a group of people that are voting, it's going to be subject to, how they feel about it. Is it a worthwhile investment? Are they getting good information about whether this is something that should be done now, or can this wait? If we wait, is it going to cost more, which is going to, increase everybody's dues eventually? And so a special assessment can often be things for something like that. In times of natural disaster, things like earthquakes, like in Los Angeles in 1994, there was a huge earthquake known as the Northridge earthquake, for which the Small Business Administration provided low interest loans to thousands upon thousands of homeowners associations. And those became special assessments that were due on top of the monthly dues for years on end. And of course, that's, maybe a once every 30-year event. More commonly, it's for things that are big ticket items that'll ride for a few years, but that's essentially what a special assessment can be.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Awesome. What's some of the biggest red flags that you see when you go through HOA documents? What should people be looking out for?
A couple of them would be when there are, if there's a number of non-occupant owners that live there. Like if it has a majority of non-occupant owners, sometimes you tend to see overspending for things by the service providers. For example, you can see pool companies that might charge 5 or 6 times more than a pool service would cost because nobody's paying attention, because there's just no owners living there and basically nobody cares about what's going on. And so somebody in charge of making the decisions maybe has a brother-in-law or somebody who runs a pool company or a landscape company, and they charge exorbitant amounts of money for services that could be obtained for, much less had anybody just paying attention.
How do you spot that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you have to look. I do have to look, and I do this with all of our clients. Is that you look through the documents and you sort of apply some common sense along with just some experience of what you've seen in terms of what other HOAs would charge for the same thing. Landscaping can be a difficult one because you don't necessarily know how much time they're going to put in, and there's always a varying amount of greenery and green belts and stuff like that. But for a pool, if they have one standard size pool and it costs $1,500 a month to service, whereas that size pool would cost about $250 at a house, there's usually something that's going on,
And now
and
there's
that's
a lot of
oftentimes
resources too.
What's that?
I feel like there's a lot of resources like Home Advisor and things like that where you can check how much stuff should cost. So if you are going through those documents.
That's a very good suggestion. There's, if you see that there's not a lot of care taken to the HOA, it's also something that would come up in the meeting minutes. Meeting minutes are the reports, the monthly reports. And oftentimes, if there's no participation by any owners, yet there's a whole lot of money being authorized for things, that's often can be a telltale sign that somebody is sort of being fed the business because nobody's basically minding the store.
Gotcha. In regards to the rules and kind of going back on the red flag thing, obviously different rules mean different things to different people, but can we go over some of the rules that you've seen that would maybe, affect certain people more than others?
Sure. Yeah. So the one thing that I always ask people once we are reviewing their documents is, tell me if you have any questions that you'd like me to ask the HOA in terms of how things that are going to affect your life. And here's a couple of examples. The most common questions that people want to know the rules about are, what are the rules about pets? And can I rent this home out as an Airbnb? And so for some people, those are their questions. And usually from that, they draw an example of, oh yeah, I really do have to think about what are the things that are going to affect me. And then I have to look into them. Some HOAs have rules that say only one pet, or that you can't have certain breeds of dogs, or that the dogs can only weigh a certain amount, or that there can be no more than 2 between cats and dogs. There's things sort of like that. Some people have, one of the big ones actually is, most buyers in an HOA have never heard of a rule known as an architectural committee. And that's actually a big one because we never want clients to start spending money on remodeling their home until they know what those architectural committee rules are and what they can or cannot do. And sometimes that means they have in mind that they want to put certain types of flooring down that the HOA may have a rule about or have a limitation or a restriction on.
Totally.
I've seen that a couple of times. Kind of jumping back, What, in terms of reserves, what do you look for an HOA to have adequate reserves?
So the rule of thumb is that 70% or higher means that they're good. So if their reserves are 70% higher, and that's higher than what is, that's based on the reserve study calculates what it will cost to replace absolutely everything in all the common areas. So the exterior walls, the ground, the foundation, the landscaping, the plumbing, and the electrical conduits inside the walls. If the pool, I mean, if it's literally the cost of everything were it all blown to smithereens, essentially. And so the percentage of that is funded, if at 70% is usually an indicator of a good financial state of health.
Awesome.
I feel like I don't see very many HOAs that have 70% funding.
Yeah, you have to, you know, it's interesting because some of them are, but a lot of them aren't. And it's oftentimes that they aren't because, like many of us, do we want to keep our money in our pocket or do we want to fund our retirements? It's all about those subjective personal choices about how people allocate their money, where they put their money to. You know, you have money coming in and then you can use it on a really, really nice car, or you could take that and put it into your retirement.
HOA reserves.
HOA, right. And it's sort of HOA reserves are along the same lines.
And the other question I have on that is I have seen some HOAs that are 100% funded, and that's thrown up a red flag in terms of building defects. Do you want to touch on that at all?
I would say that would be more specific to the physical condition of that HOA. That could come about because either they are hoarding money in preparation for some really big event that they know that they've put off for a while, or they could have incurred a lot of costs that they didn't expect, and they want to get back financially on track, and they don't want to sort of fall behind. There's any number of things, but again, it's all subjective as to the views of those owners and how they go about either allocating the leadership of, you know, their board of directors, president, and so forth, as to how those people see things, and then they suggest.
What I mean is that because the statute of limitations for litigation for building defects from the builder, and then the HOA has won a lawsuit, so that's something else for the new owners to be aware of. Correct?
Oh, yeah. Well, I have seen a lot of times that after a new build, there oftentimes are lawsuits between the HOA and the builder, and that can usually take a few years to settle. An agent in my company actually, one of his listings, the seller there disclosed a lot of a lawsuit that happened to be KB Homes, and they had all kinds of construction defects that were found that led to a whole slew of repairs being done inside people's homes, inside their walls and inside their kitchens, some defective cabinetry and sort of the walls that they were attached to behind that and everything. And so yeah, that can be that's sort of a grab bag of anything goes. But one of the things that's nice when you're buying resale is that as opposed to buying a new home, is that someone else has had the experience and the history to sort of go through all that pain and all of the figuring out all the bad things, the home settling, where the cracks are going to be, the revealed lawsuit and defects that may have happened,
totally,
all of the settlements that have come from that, and and all of the costs that have been already spent.
So Jason, any advice you would give a new homeowner that maybe has questions about the ability to change some of the rules or have their say as a homeowner?
Yeah, so I think that the first thing that people have to do is make sure that what they want to, I don't want to say accomplish, but I guess how they want to live and how they want their life to be, will this homeowners association be a good fit for them? So an example would be that people who have, let's say, 3 dogs, where the HOA rules say you can only have 1 dog, if you're going to move in there with 3 dogs, you want to know those rules because the HOA rules are going to reign supreme. That the rules as they are written is going to be how they are enforced. And so you want to make sure that your lifestyle matches what the homeowners association allows. You also want to keep in mind that, and I tell this to a lot of buyers, because a lot of buyers look at all of these rules and all of the restrictions and they say, wow, sometimes this feels like it's me versus the HOA. And that's a feeling that a lot of buyers come away with. And I often remind them that, these rules are there to protect you from nuisances, just like they are there to enforce everything. So if you have a neighbor or somebody who's, making your life miserable because they have something going on that the rules don't allow, you now have an extra layer of protection that you can actually sort of use to enforce to get that to stop. Whereas if you're in a single family house in a neighborhood, your best, sort of your best resources to either talk to that neighbor or call the cops, And with an HOA, it's just important to know whether, is this HOA a good fit for me? So like somebody who eventually wants to rent out their home as an Airbnb, is there a rule that prohibits me from doing that? And I want to know that obviously before I buy, because had I known, you never want anybody to come back and say, well, if I would have known this about what I wanted to do, I would have never purchased this home. And so that's why I think it's so important to examine these things, in depth and find out exactly what's going to be meaningful to that buyer.
Totally.
So it sounds like every HOA is essentially different. So it's really important to dig through these items and figure out, yeah. How do buyers know what they're going to be responsible for versus what the HOA is responsible for maintaining?
That's a good question. And typically it is spelled out in the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, but what they call the cc&rs, but it's very vague. And I actually made a printout of one such HOA that has this. This is very rare, unfortunately, but I'll show you, it's very helpful, but it's rare. So here's just an example. This is from this, if you can see this here, this is—
Yeah, we can attach it too.
Oh, okay. This is a matrix that shows what things in the entire building are the responsibility of the owners and the responsibility of the association. And something like this, which this one happens to go on for 5 or 6 pages, it makes it really, really helpful to delineate where the line of it's my responsibility as the owner versus where's the line of I tell the HOA and they're going to take care of it. Unfortunately, only about maybe 25% of homeowners associations actually publish this as part of their cc&rs. And I actually wish, I'm not one that likes to see, endless regulations and laws created, but I wish that they made this, that the legislature in California made this a law within HOAs, that every HOA should have this, because it completely eliminates the gray area about who's responsible for what. But this type of matrix and chart only exists in about 25% of all HOAs at all in California.
So how do you find it if they don't have it? Just ask specifically?
Yeah, you can always ask there's a few ways you can go about it. If you're in a large homeowners association, you probably have a property management company, and that company usually has 1 or 2 representatives that will know the ins and outs of what the HOA will cover and what they won't. In a smaller community or in a community that just does not have a property management company, you would go to the president of the HOA, the board of directors, which usually is a president or a treasurer, secretary, things like that, and you would ask them. But you do want to be armed with the actual cc&rs, and sometimes they're vague, and so it leaves an open-ended debate about who's going to pay for what. And sometimes they are very, very clear, but they're just buried inside the documents.
Perfect.
So just taking a step back and looking kind of at everything that we've discussed from the standpoint of your HOA contingency. You've got a certain number of days to review these documents, get the questions that you have answered. If there's anything in these documents that doesn't sit well with you, you can remove yourself from escrow based off of what this says. So we just want to make sure that that's clear to everybody watching this. It's part of the disclosures that you'll be receiving during escrow. I would say it's probably the thing that takes the longest to get. Would you guys agree?
I would definitely agree.
100%. Always the lagging information comes from the HOA.
Totally. Anything you want to add, Alyssa, or any other questions that we have?
I would just advise people look for inconsistencies in the documents. Always kind of go through and make sure the story matches up, Also, if you are getting an FHA or a VA loan, the HOA does need to be FHA or VA approved. I know that you and I have submitted for FHA and VA approval for our buyers in the past and even our sellers in the past to help make the property more marketable. And then I think on a last note, Jason, you've also sat on so many litigation and mediation boards. Have you seen issues with HOAs come up, and what have you seen come up on those boards? What would be like your biggest horror story you've seen?
I can actually recall one very specifically, a mediation that I was involved with where a buyer or an owner who lived inside an HOA was being sued by the HOA for not paying her dues. Mm-hmm. And it turned out that there were actually 2 homeowners associations in the complex where she lived. And she felt that she was not made aware of what they call the master association. These are rare, but in some master plan communities, yeah, they have one master HOA, and then there's what they call a sub HOA. she apparently, her assertion was that she was only aware of the sub HOA, and because nobody told her about the master, that she didn't owe her dues, and that was not working at all. And so she just never paid it, and then they of course accrued all these charges, and it was a big mess. And so that was probably the biggest one that I saw.
Wow.
They can essentially try to foreclose on your property if you don't pay.
Oh, they absolutely will. And well, I usually should say that they'll try, depending on the level of aggressiveness. They do. You are absolutely right, though. The HOA, if you do not pay your dues, has every right to foreclose on your home. That is absolutely 100% true. And a lot of times, when people think, hey, this is my property, I have the right to do whatever, that's not exactly actually true. You are buying in a home where these rules come as part of the purchase. And so I think you're right to suggest that people ask questions, that you dive in, that you find out, if you have curiosity about things, definitely ask, definitely make your voice known about what concerns you most, and really examine all of the documents and just make sure, like you said, that it fits well with what you want to do and how you want to live your life.
Yeah, and it's super important to have
Awesome.
a team like us and you, Jason, to be able to put a second set of eyes on these documents, because there's probably things that you've never seen before, especially if you're a first-time home buyer. And it's great to have a solid team behind you to do, the extra digging that's necessary.
Awesome. Well, I think that kind of wraps it up. So that covers HOA, what to be aware of, what to look out for during your contingency period. We really appreciate you coming on, Jason.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jason. We really appreciate it.
No, that's a pleasure. And thank you so much for having me.
Awesome.
Absolutely. We'll have you on again soon.
Bye.
Sounds great.
Bye.